Dr. Thomas Reed had seen plenty of unusual medical cases during his 15 years as a xenobiologist, but nothing quite prepared him for the patient floating unconsciously in the medical bay's specialized aquatic tank. The emergency transport from the outer rim had arrived 3 hours ago, carrying what the manifest described as one thalassan female, critical condition, reproductive system failure with accompanying motor dysfunction. That critical condition proved to be diplomatic understatement. The woman, Arya, according to her identification beacon, lay suspended in synthetic seawater that glowed faintly blue with the nutrients her species required for basic cellular function. Where a healthy thalassan would display powerful, iridescent fins capable of propelling them through water at tremendous speeds, Arya's lower body showed withered, grayish appendages that barely qualified as functional limbs. "How long has she been like this?" Thomas asked Dr. Maya Patel, his research partner, as they studied the preliminary scans. According to the transport records, approximately 18 months of progressive deterioration. Her own people gave up on her 6 months ago. Maya's expression carried the clinical detachment that came with years of treating desperate cases. They classified her as genetically defective and recommended termination of life support. Genetically defective. Thomas snorted, adjusting the scanner parameters to get deeper tissue readings. Translation: they don't understand what's wrong, so they blame her DNA. The thalassans were an aquatic species whose entire civilization existed in vast underwater cities throughout the galaxy's ocean worlds. Their society revolved around reproductive success and physical perfection, with social status directly tied to one's ability to produce offspring and contribute to the communal gene pool. A thalassan who couldn't reproduce was effectively dead to their own kind. "The cellular degradation patterns are interesting," Thomas observed, studying the holographic display that showed Arya's physiology in three-dimensional detail. "This doesn't look like natural genetic defect. The damage is too systematic, too uniform across multiple organ systems." "Environmental toxin exposure," Maya suggested, pulling up comparison data from their xenobiology database. "That's what I'm thinking. Look at these cellular markers." Thomas highlighted sections of the scan that showed distinctive crystalline deposits in Arya's tissues. "I've seen this pattern before in species exposed to heavy metal from industrial mining operations." The irony wasn't lost on him. The Thalassan High Council had probably contracted with human mining corporations to extract rare minerals from ocean worlds, and the runoff had poisoned their own people. Now they wanted to dispose of the evidence rather than acknowledge their responsibility. Arya stirred in the tank, her eyes opening to reveal irises that shifted color like deep ocean water. When she saw Thomas and Maya through the transparent aluminum walls, her expression held no hope, just weary resignation to whatever fresh indignity awaited her. Thomas activated the tank's communication system. "Hello, Arya. I'm Dr. Thomas Reed, and this is Dr. Maya Patel. We're here to help." Arya's laugh came out as bubbles that rose through the synthetic seawater. "Help? I've heard that before. Let me guess. You want to study the defective thalassan before deciding whether I'm worth the cost of life support." "Actually, I want to figure out why someone who should be perfectly healthy is dying of what looks like preventable poisoning." Thomas's blunt response seemed to surprise her. "Though I have to ask, how much do you know about experimental medical procedures?" "Depends. Are they more or less painful than slowly dissolving into biological waste?" Thomas found himself grinning despite the grim circumstances. "Probably about the same, but with significantly better long-term prospects." He spent the next hour explaining his preliminary findings to Arya, using the tank's holographic display to show her the extent of the damage to her reproductive organs and muscular system. The toxin exposure had specifically targeted the bioelectrical networks that thalassans use to control their fins and regulate their reproductive cycles. "So you're saying I'm not genetically defective," Arya said slowly, studying the scans with intelligent curiosity. "I'm just poisoned. Systematically poisoned over a long period, probably through contaminated food sources or water supplies." Thomas highlighted the affected areas. "But here's the interesting part. Your base genetics are actually exceptional. Superior muscle fiber density, enhanced neural pathways, reproductive organs that should be capable of producing offspring with remarkable genetic diversity. That should be, with the right treatment, could be again. But I need to be honest about what that treatment would involve." Thomas pulled up a theoretical surgical plan he'd been developing while they talked. "Repairing the damage means completely rebuilding your lower body from the cellular level up. Your fins are too damaged to save, but I could give you legs instead, functional legs that would allow you to survive both in water and on land." Arya's color-shifting eyes widened. "Legs like humans have. More advanced than human legs, actually. Amphibious design, enhanced strength, full aquatic capability while adding terrestrial mobility." Thomas felt his excitement building as he explained the theoretical procedure. "And once we repair your reproductive system, you'd be able to have children again." Children. Arya spoke the word like a prayer she'd forgotten how to say. "You really think it's possible? I think you're the perfect candidate for procedures that could revolutionize interspecies medicine. Fair warning, though, you'd be the first thalassian to undergo this kind of genetic reconstruction. There are risks we can't predict." Arya was quiet for a long moment, floating in her tank while studying the surgical projections. Finally, she looked directly at Thomas with an expression that mixed desperate hope with bitter humor. "Doctor Reed, I've been dead to my own people for 6 months. They sent me here expecting you to confirm their diagnosis and recommend disposal. Whatever risks your experimental procedures involve, they can't be worse than the certainty of dying alone and forgotten." She paused, then added with a slight smile, "Besides, I've always wondered what it would be like to walk." Thomas felt something shift in his chest. A familiar combination of scientific fascination and protective instinct that always emerged when he encountered a patient who refused to surrender to impossible circumstances. "Then let's see about getting you back on your feet, or in this case, getting you feet to begin with." Maya began preparing the surgical suite while Thomas finalized the treatment plan. But he couldn't shake the feeling that this case would be different from anything they'd attempted before. Arya wasn't just another patient requiring innovative treatment. She was a person whose entire future depended on his ability to perform medical miracles. "One question," Arya called as they prepared to begin the preliminary procedures. "What made you specialize in supposedly hopeless cases?" Thomas paused in his equipment calibration. "Someone has to believe in the impossible, or nothing would ever change. And if this doesn't work, then we'll have learned something valuable for the next person who needs the same help." Thomas met her gaze through the tank walls. "But I have a feeling you're going to surprise everyone, including yourself." As the medical bay filled with the hum of advanced surgical equipment and the soft glow of genetic reconstruction matrices, Thomas found himself wondering if he was about to heal more than just Arya's damaged body. Maybe, just maybe, he was about to discover what it meant to give someone back their entire future. The genetic reconstruction surgery that began 3 weeks ago had turned into the most complex medical procedure Thomas had ever attempted. What should have been a straightforward tissue regeneration process revealed layers of biological complexity that challenged everything he thought he knew about thalassian physiology. "The cellular response is unlike anything in our database," Maya reported, studying the real-time scans of Arya's transforming lower body. "Her tissues aren't just healing, they're reorganizing according to genetic patterns we've never seen before." Thomas watched in fascination as microscopic cameras showed Arya's damaged fin structures dissolving, while entirely new bone and muscle formations took their place. The process required constant adjustment of the genetic templates they were using, as if her body had its own blueprint that superseded their medical programming. It's like she's remembering how to be something she's never been before, Thomas mused, adjusting the bioelectric stimulation patterns that guided the cellular reconstruction. Maya, pull up the comparative evolutionary data on ancient thalassan physiology. While Maya worked at her console, Thomas checked on Arya, who floated in the specialized regeneration tank that provided both the aquatic environment she needed and the sterile conditions required for major surgery. She was conscious but medicated, her eyes following the holographic displays that showed her body's transformation in real time. "How are you feeling?" Thomas asked through the communication system. "Like I'm becoming someone else," Arya replied, her voice carrying wonder despite the obvious discomfort. "But also like I'm becoming who I was always supposed to be, if that makes sense." "Actually, it makes perfect sense." Thomas called up the evolutionary data Maya had compiled. "Look at this. Ancient thalassan skeletal remains show evidence of amphibious adaptation. Your people weren't always purely aquatic." The holographic display showed fossilized remains of early thalassans who possessed both functional fins and primitive leg structures, capable of surviving in multiple environments. Over millions of years, environmental pressures had forced specialization toward purely aquatic life, with the terrestrial adaptations gradually disappearing from the species' genome. "You're telling me my ancestors could walk?" Arya studied the ancient skeletal structures with obvious fascination. More than that, they were adapted for survival in conditions that would kill modern thalassans. Enhanced lung capacity, pressure resistance, the ability to process nutrients from both aquatic and terrestrial food sources. Thomas highlighted the relevant features in the display. "The toxin exposure that damaged your system may have actually triggered dormant genetic sequences. So I'm not evolving into something new, I'm reverting to something old." "Both, actually. Your body is accessing ancestral genetic patterns while incorporating modern thalassan improvements and the human-designed enhancements we're adding." Thomas felt his excitement growing as the implications became clear. "You're going to be more capable than either ancient or modern thalassans." The conversation was interrupted by alarms from the monitoring equipment. Arya's bioelectrical readings were spiking beyond normal parameters, and the regeneration process was accelerating far faster than the medical projections indicated. "Thomas, look at this," Maya called urgently. "Her neural activity is off the charts. It's like she's accessing genetic memories stored at the cellular level." Through the tank's viewing ports, they watched Arya's expression change from confusion to wonder as her consciousness expanded beyond normal thalassan awareness. Her color-shifting eyes began displaying patterns Thomas had never seen before, complex geometric shapes that seemed to pulse with meaning. "Arya, can you hear me? What are you experiencing?" "I can see, remember. The deep cities before the great waters rose. My people dancing between ocean and land, breathing air and water with equal ease." Arya's voice carried an otherworldly quality, as if she were speaking from vast temporal distance. "We were never meant to be trapped in one element." The genetic reconstruction continued for hours, while Arya experienced what could only be described as species-wide ancestral recall. She described technological achievements that predated recorded thalassan history, ecological disasters that forced evolutionary adaptations, and cultural practices that had been lost for millennia. "The breeding restrictions," Arya said suddenly, her consciousness snapping back to the present. "The High Council's obsession with genetic purity, it's not protection, it's gradual extinction." The arrival of the Thalassan High Council's enforcement vessel changed everything in the worst possible way. Thomas watched through the research station's observation deck as the sleek, bioluminescent ship docked with mechanical precision that somehow managed to look threatening. Within minutes, his communication console was flooded with official demands written in the flowing script of formal Thalassan diplomacy. They're not here for a social visit, Maya observed grimly, reading the translated documents. Official charges against Arya include genetic contamination, species violation, and willful deviation from approved biological parameters. Species violation. Thomas felt his blood pressure rising as he scanned the legal terminology. She's the victim here, not the criminal. Try explaining that to beings whose entire society is built around genetic purity, Arya said quietly from the medical bay doorway. She had insisted on reading the charges herself, and Thomas could see the old resignation creeping back into her posture, despite her remarkable physical transformation. The lead council representative, an imposing Thalassan named Elder Nea, whose ceremonial bioluminescent tattoos marked her as someone accustomed to absolute authority, wasted no time making her position clear. Her species' universal translators rendered her words in clipped, formal English that somehow made every sentence sound like a death sentence. The entity formerly known as Arya of the Deep Currents has been irreversibly contaminated by unauthorized genetic manipulation, Elder Nea announced during their first meeting in the station's conference room. Standard protocol requires immediate sterilization and indefinite quarantine to prevent spread of genetic abnormalities. Genetic abnormalities that have restored her health and enhanced her physical capabilities beyond normal Thalassan parameters, Thomas countered, pulling up the medical data on his display screen. Every metric shows improvement. Improvements that violate the genetic codes established by millennia of careful breeding oversight. This entity's new configuration represents a threat to species integrity. Thomas felt Arya tense beside him, and he placed what he hoped was a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Elder Nea, with respect, your breeding oversight has produced steadily declining fertility rates and increased genetic disorders. Arya's transformation suggests solutions to problems your people have been ignoring. Elder Nea's bioluminescent patterns shifted to colors Thomas didn't recognize, but which made Arya flinch. Human presumption in matters of Thalassan biology is noted and rejected. The entity will be returned for proper disposal. Like hell she will, Thomas said, abandoning diplomatic niceties. Arya is a patient under my medical care, and I don't release patients to people threatening to harm them. The standoff might have continued indefinitely, if not for the emergency alert that interrupted their increasingly heated discussion. Maya burst into the conference room with medical scanner readings that made Thomas's breath catch. "Thomas, you need to see this immediately," Maya said, casting nervous glances at Elder Nea. "Arya's latest blood work shows something unprecedented. Can we discuss this privately?" I think privacy just became irrelevant. Maya activated the holographic display, showing cellular analysis that made Elder Nea's bioluminescent patterns flare with what Thomas had learned was extreme agitation. "She's pregnant," Maya announced simply. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crush the space station's structural supports. Thomas stared at the medical data while his mind raced through the implications. Arya's expression showed shock giving way to wonder, while Elder Nea looked like she was witnessing the end of civilization. "Pregnant," Thomas repeated, trying to process information that should have been impossible. "But she's only been fertile for 2 weeks, and there's been no opportunity for reproduction with another Thalassan." "That's correct," Maya said carefully. "The genetic markers indicate the father is human." Elder Nea's reaction was immediate and explosive. Her bioluminescent displays flashed through patterns that the universal translator couldn't interpret, though the emotional content was unmistakable rage and horror. When she finally spoke, her words carried the weight of absolute condemnation. Genetic contamination has proceeded beyond sterilization protocols. Complete elimination is now required to prevent species corruption. "You're talking about murdering a pregnant woman," Thomas said, standing to place himself between Elder Nea and Arya. "That's not happening on my watch. The entity is no longer Thalassan. It has become a hybrid abomination that threatens the genetic integrity of pure bloodlines. Arya finally spoke, her voice carrying steady strength despite the chaos surrounding her. Elder Nea, what if you're wrong about genetic purity? What if the restrictions that produced my supposed defects are actually killing our species? Impossible. The breeding codes have preserved thalassan genetic superiority for thousands of generations. And during those same generations, fertility rates have declined, genetic disorders have increased, and the population has stagnated. Arya stood, her new legs carrying her with confidence that seemed to unsettle Elder Nea. I can access ancestral memories now, genetic records older than your precious breeding codes. Our people weren't always trapped in underwater cities, dependent on artificial life support systems. Thomas watched in fascination as Arya's enhanced genetics allowed her to project bioluminescent patterns that matched Elder Nea's formal communication style. The conversation shifted into rapid visual exchanges that the universal translators couldn't follow, but Thomas could see Elder Nea's certainty beginning to waver. "Show her," Thomas urged. "Show her what you remember about ancient Thalassan civilization." Arya moved to the holographic display, her hands interfacing with the controls in ways that should have been impossible for someone who had never used human technology. The projection filled with images from her genetic memories, vast cities that existed both underwater and on land, thalassans who moved freely between elements, technological achievements that surpassed anything in modern Thalassan society. "This is what we were before the Great Restriction," Arya said, her bioluminescent patterns now matching the ancient visual languages she was accessing. "Amphibious, adaptable, genetically diverse. The breeding codes weren't preserving our superiority, they were preserving our limitations." Elder Nea studied the ancient records with obvious internal conflict. These memories could be contamination artifacts from the genetic manipulation. "Then explain this," Maya interrupted, pulling up real-time scans of Arya's pregnancy. "The fetal development shows characteristics that shouldn't exist in either human or Thalassan biology. Enhanced neural pathways, dual respiratory systems, genetic markers that suggest adaptation capabilities beyond anything either species has produced independently." Thomas felt pieces clicking into place as he studied the fetal scans. "It's not contamination, it's restoration. The pregnancy is expressing genetic potential that both species lost through evolutionary specialization. A hybrid child that could survive in any environment," Arya added, her hand moving instinctively to her stomach. "Water, land, maybe even space with the right life support. This isn't genetic corruption, it's genetic liberation." Elder Nea was quiet for a long moment, her bioluminescent patterns cycling through what Thomas had learned were complex emotional states. Finally, she spoke with careful formality that couldn't quite hide her uncertainty. "These claims require verification by the full High Council. The entity and its offspring represent unprecedented circumstances that exceed standard protocols." "Meaning?" "Meaning I cannot authorize elimination without council consensus, but neither can I permit unrestricted movement." Elder Nea's patterns shifted to something resembling reluctant compromise. "Temporary protective custody, while the council reviews all evidence." Thomas felt relief mixed with continuing anxiety. Protective custody where? On the research station, under joint human-Thalassan medical supervision. But if the council rules against genetic deviation, the entity and its offspring will be terminated regardless of human objections. Arya's hand found Thomas's, her grip conveying both gratitude and fear. "How long do we have?" "The council convenes in 30 days. Until then, you remain under medical observation while we compile evidence regarding genetic restoration versus genetic contamination." As Elder Nea left to prepare her report, Thomas found himself facing 30 days to prove that Arya's transformation represented evolution rather than corruption. More importantly, he had 30 days to protect the woman who had trusted him with her life, and the child who might represent the future of both their species. "Well," Arya said with determined humor, "at least now I have a deadline for figuring out how to be pregnant with a child that shouldn't exist." "We'll figure it out together," Thomas replied, surprised by how naturally the word "we" came to him. "All three of us." The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, ancient Thalassian archives that Arya's enhanced genetic memory could now access directly. 2 weeks before the High Council's final verdict, she discovered quantum genetic records embedded in her own DNA that proved everything Elder Nea believed about species purity was catastrophically wrong. "Look at this," Arya said, interfacing with the holographic display in ways that still amazed Thomas. Her consciousness could somehow translate genetic memories into visual data that their equipment could process. Population genetics from before the Great Restriction. Thalassian civilization wasn't just amphibious, it was actively hybridizing with dozens of compatible species. Thomas studied the genetic flow charts that appeared in the projection, showing evolutionary branches that connected thalassians to species across multiple star systems. They were deliberately seeking genetic diversity. More than that, they were creating it. The ancient Thalassian Empire succeeded because they could adapt to any environment by incorporating useful traits from local species. Arya's bioluminescent patterns pulsed with excitement as she accessed deeper memory layers. The breeding restrictions that Elder Nea thinks preserve genetic superiority are actually the cause of our decline. Maya joined them in the research lab, carrying data from the fetal development scans that had been monitoring the pregnancy's unprecedented progress. "Speaking of genetic diversity, your child is developing capabilities that neither parent species possesses independently. Enhanced neuroplasticity, redundant organ systems, cellular structures that can process multiple atmospheric compositions. A child designed for survival in conditions that would kill either humans or modern thalassians," Thomas observed with wonder and growing concern. "But also a child that proves interspecies reproduction isn't contamination, it's restoration of natural genetic processes." The timing of their discovery proved crucial. Elder Nea arrived that afternoon with a preliminary council ruling that would have been a death sentence under normal circumstances. Her bioluminescent patterns showed formal authority mixed with what Thomas had learned to recognize as personal uncertainty. "The High Council has reviewed all evidence regarding genetic deviation," Elder Nea announced in the research lab where Arya floated in a specialized tank designed for her amphibious physiology. "Standard ruling would be elimination of corrupted genetic material to protect species integrity." "But," Thomas prompted, noting the hesitation in Elder Nea's formal presentation, "but certain council members have raised questions about the historical accuracy of current breeding protocols. They request direct examination of the entity's genetic memories before final judgment." Arya exchanged glances with Thomas before responding. "What kind of examination?" "Consciousness interface with council genetic historians. They want to verify whether your ancestral memories represent genuine historical data or contamination artifacts. And if they determine the memories are genuine." Elder Nea's patterns shifted to colors Thomas had never seen before. "Then, everything we believe about Thalassian genetic superiority requires reevaluation." The consciousness interface took place in a specially prepared chamber where Thalassian quantum biology could safely interact with human neural monitoring equipment. Thomas watched anxiously as Arya linked her enhanced awareness with 3 council historians whose combined age exceeded human civilization. What happened during the next 6 hours changed everything. The historians emerged from the interface session with bioluminescent patterns that conveyed shock, wonder, and what looked suspiciously like shame. Their spokesperson, an ancient thalassin named Deep Current Memory, delivered findings that reverberated through both human and thalassin scientific communities. The genetic memories are authentic, Deep Current Memory announced. Moreover, they reveal that current breeding restrictions were implemented during a period of species-wide panic following environmental catastrophe. The restrictions were meant to be temporary measures to ensure basic survival. Temporary measures that became permanent ideology, Arya added, her patterns now matching the formal council communication style with fluent ease. For 3,000 years, Thalassan society has been operating under crisis protocols that were never meant to be permanent genetic policy. Elder Nea's formal composure finally cracked. You're saying our entire civilization is built on a mistake. Not a mistake, an incomplete solution. The environmental crisis that triggered the restrictions ended millennia ago, but the restrictions remained. They've been slowly killing our species through genetic stagnation. Thomas found his voice in the stunned silence that followed. What does this mean for Arya and her pregnancy? Deep current memories, patterns shifted to something resembling profound respect. It means this entity represents not genetic contamination, but genetic restoration. Her offspring could be the key to reversing 3,000 years of evolutionary decline. The official council ruling, when it came, exceeded Thomas's most optimistic projections. Not only were Arya and her child granted full protection, but the council authorized establishment of a joint human thalassan genetic research facility dedicated to reversing the effects of prolonged genetic restriction. We're going to need a bigger research station. The crystalline canyon walls reflected their shuttle's exhaust in brilliant, shifting patterns that would have been beautiful if Sarah hadn't been too busy trying not to crash into them. Behind them, the Etherian pursuit ships moved with fluid grace, their weapons firing concentrated bursts of what Lyreley had cheerfully described as weaponized depression. You know, Sarah said, wrestling the shuttle through another impossibly narrow passage. When I signed up for deep space research, the recruitment brochure definitely didn't mention emotional warfare. I would have remembered that part. Lyreley's hands continued to glow with soft light as she worked to counteract the Etherian weapon's effects. Your species' recruitment materials are remarkably optimistic. Do they also fail to mention the possibility of equipment failures, hostile alien encounters, and bureaucratic complications? Oh no, they mention all of that, Sarah replied, pulling the shuttle into a sharp climb to avoid a particularly aggressive crystal formation. They just make it sound exciting instead of terrifying. Marketing is basically weaponized optimism. The alien woman's musical laugh helped offset another wave of artificially induced despair from their pursuers. I am beginning to understand why your species has survived so long despite your technological limitations. You have developed immunity to your own propaganda. Sarah checked her displays as they emerged from the canyon system into a broader valley filled with what appeared to be ruins. Ancient structures rose from the moon's surface, their architecture unlike anything in human databases but somehow familiar in ways that made her brain itch. Well, that's new, she observed, scanning the structures below. Either this moon has been hiding some very old secrets, or we've accidentally discovered the universe's most elaborate miniature golf course. Lyreley leaned forward, her ears practically vibrating with excitement. Those are precursor ruins. The first civilization, they existed millions of years ago, before the great dispersal that scattered the younger species across the galaxy. Precursors, huh? Let me guess. Mysteriously advanced, left behind incomprehensible technology, and probably had strong opinions about interstellar politics. Actually, according to historical records, they were remarkably peaceful. They developed technology that enhanced natural abilities rather than replacing them, much like your species' approach. The collective has always claimed they were destroyed in some great catastrophe, but Another emotion bomb exploded nearby, filling Sarah with the sudden conviction that nothing she had ever done mattered, and she should probably just give up now. Lyralay's counteracting presence helped, but Sarah could feel the artificial despair clinging to the edges of her consciousness like cosmic lint. But you think they might have just gotten tired of dealing with younger species drama and decided to hide out somewhere nice? Sarah suggested, diving toward the ruins. Honestly, that sounds like a pretty reasonable retirement plan. The ancient structures were massive up close, built from materials that seemed to absorb and reflect light in impossible ways. Sarah found what appeared to be a landing area, or at least a flat space large enough for her shuttle, and set down between two towering spires that hummed with barely audible energy. "The Etherian ships are maintaining distance," Lyralay reported, checking the displays with growing confusion. "They should have followed us down, but they appear to be hesitant." Sarah powered down the shuttle's main systems, leaving only life support and sensors active. Maybe they're afraid of ancient alien technology that might turn them into space dust. Or maybe they're just really bad at parallel parking. "There are legends," Lyralay said slowly, "about precursor sites that still function. Locations where their technology responds to the presence of different species, offering knowledge or assistance to those who approach with peaceful intent, and presumably turning hostile visitors into very small particles. The legends are unclear on specific consequences, but they consistently emphasize the importance of respectful behavior and genuine curiosity." Sarah gathered her scanning equipment, trying to ignore the Etherian ships circling overhead like technological vultures. "Well, I'm definitely curious, and I'm usually respectful, except when dealing with malfunctioning coffee machines or bureaucratic forms that don't make sense." They left the shuttle and approached the nearest structure, which rose impossibly high into the thin atmosphere. The surface was smooth but not featureless. Patterns flowed across it like living circuitry, responding to their presence with gentle pulses of light. "It recognizes us," Lyralay whispered, reaching out to touch the wall. Where her fingers made contact, the patterns brightened and began to move more quickly. Sarah placed her own hand on the surface, and the patterns shifted again, taking on different colors and geometries. "Either this thing is very friendly, or we're about to be scanned, cataloged, and possibly filed under interesting specimens in some cosmic database." The wall suddenly became transparent, revealing a corridor that extended deeper into the structure. Lights activated along the walls, creating a pathway that seemed to invite exploration. "Well," Sarah said, shouldering her equipment bag, "at least it's more welcoming than most government buildings. No forms to fill out, no security checkpoints, and the lighting is actually pleasant." They walked through corridors that adjusted their illumination to optimal levels for both human and Etherian vision, past chambers filled with technology that defied easy categorization. Some spaces contained what might have been laboratories, others seemed designed for contemplation or artistic expression. The precursors believed in harmony between technology and biology, Lyralay explained, as they passed a chamber where plants that shouldn't exist in this atmosphere grew in perfect spirals around crystalline structures. They saw no distinction between natural and artificial. Everything was part of a larger pattern. "That explains why this place doesn't feel creepy despite being millions of years old, and probably haunted by ancient alien ghosts," Sarah observed. "It's like someone designed it to be comfortable for any species that might wander in." They reached a central chamber dominated by a structure that was definitely some kind of communication device, though its design incorporated elements that seemed grown rather than built. Surfaces that might have been control panels pulsed with gentle light, and the air hummed with potential energy. "A quantum communicator," Lyralay breathed, approaching the device with reverence. "Capable of instantaneous communication across any distance. The collective has spent centuries trying to develop such technology." Sarah examined the device with her scanner, which provided readings that made absolutely no sense according to known physics. It's definitely functional. I'm getting power readings that suggest this thing could probably broadcast to every inhabited system in the galaxy simultaneously. With this device, you could contact your people for assistance, Lyreley said, though her voice carried reluctance. But activating it would also reveal our location to the Etherian ships above. They would know exactly where to find us. And presumably they'd be able to track any transmission we sent, which means they'd learn about humanity's location and capabilities, Sarah added. Classic no-win scenario. We can call for help, but doing so puts everyone at risk. Lyreley sat down on what appeared to be a meditation cushion that had been waiting millions of years for someone to use it. There is another consideration. If your people become involved in the quantum communicator activated with a sound like crystalline bells singing in perfect harmony, and Sarah found herself connected to every major communication network in human space simultaneously. Her voice, she realized with mild panic, was about to be broadcast to approximately 12 billion people. Well, she said to Lyreley, I've always wanted to be famous. I just figured it would be for discovering something, not for accidentally starting an interspecies incident. Your species' approach to diplomacy appears to involve significant improvisation, Lyreley observed, watching the communication patterns flow across the ancient device's surfaces. We prefer to call it adaptive strategy, Sarah replied, then addressed the communicator. This is Dr. Sarah Mitchell, Kepler Station, broadcasting on all frequencies. I'm currently on an uncharted moon in the Epsilon Cygni system, with a refugee from a species called the Etherian Collective, and we have a situation that's about to become everyone's problem. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Voices from Fleet Command, research stations, colonial governments, and what sounded like her grandmother asking if she was eating enough vegetables. Sarah held up a hand for quiet, though she doubted the gesture would translate across light years. The short version, she continued, is that we've discovered a species that feeds on emotional energy, and they're currently engaged in what amounts to a civil rights dispute about whether consent matters in the feeding process. Also, they have very advanced technology and some strong opinions about species they consider inferior. Commander Harrison's voice cut through the chatter, somehow managing to sound bureaucratically outraged across interstellar distances. Dr. Mitchell, you are in violation of approximately 17 different protocols, and I expect a full report filed in triplicate upon your return. I'll get right on that, Commander, assuming we survive the next few hours, Sarah replied cheerfully. But first, I need to explain why this matters to everyone listening. She gestured to Lyreley, who moved closer to the communicator. The alien woman's voice carried across the quantum link with its distinctive musical harmonics, causing what Sarah suspected was a collective intake of breath from 12 billion humans. My people, the Etherian Collective, sustain themselves through emotional absorption, Lyreley said. For millennia, this has been accomplished through forced extraction, leaving subjects depleted and often permanently damaged. I was exiled for proposing consensual exchange, taking freely given negative emotions while providing positive energy in return. So you're basically offering therapy that benefits both parties, Sarah added, and your government decided this was somehow criminal. It's like being prosecuted for practicing medicine without a license, except the license is for emotional vampirism and nobody asked if the patients wanted to be bitten. The communication channels erupted with questions, demands for proof, and several suggestions about what Sarah should do with her unauthorized mission that were probably anatomically impossible. Through the chaos, she heard a familiar voice, Dr. Alina Rodriguez from the xenopsychology department. Sarah, if this being can actually absorb and redistribute emotional energy, the therapeutic applications could revolutionize mental health treatment. Can you demonstrate the process? Sarah felt a wave of anxiety about the situation, 12 billion people listening, 3 alien ships overhead, and the growing certainty that she just changed the course of human history without filing proper paperwork. Then Lyralay's influence washed over her, not taking the anxiety away but transforming it into something manageable, purposeful. Did everyone feel that? Sarah asked. Because I just went from panic attack to nervous but functional without any medication or meditation techniques. The response was immediate. Researchers wanting to study the phenomenon, military officials asking about weapons applications, and philosophers debating the implications for consciousness and free will. In the background, Sarah could hear the Etherian ships above them beginning to descend. "Here's the thing," Sarah said, watching the alien vessels approach through the ruins' transparasteel dome. The Etherian collective just arrived to reclaim their refugee, and we have maybe 5 minutes to figure out whether this ends with interspecies cooperation or interspecies war. Anyone have thoughts on optimal negotiation strategies? Admiral Chen's voice came through clearly, carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected millions of lives. "Dr. Mitchell, can your friend establish communication with the Etherian ships?" Lyralay nodded, placing her hands on the quantum communicator. The device's patterns shifted, taking on new colors and geometries as it adapted to Etherian communication protocols. When she spoke, her words carried additional layers of meaning that even the translation systems couldn't fully capture. "Pursuit Squadron 7, this is Lyralay of the Healing Guild. I invoke diplomatic sanctuary under precursor protocols and request formal audience with the Collective Council." The response came in harmonics that made Sarah's teeth ache, but the translation was clear enough. "Exile Lyralay, you will surrender immediately for processing and correction. The inferior species harboring you will face consequences for interference." "Well, that's not ominous at all," Sarah muttered, then addressed her own people. "Did everyone catch that? Because apparently we're an inferior species that needs to learn some manners." What happened next surprised everyone, especially Sarah. The collective response from 12 billion humans wasn't fear or anger, it was laughter. The quantum communicator carried the sound across space, a distinctly human expression of amusement at being dismissed by beings they'd never met. "You know what?" came a voice Sarah recognized as belonging to Captain Maria Santos from the Colonial Defense Fleet. "I've been called worse things by better people. Tell the Etherians we'd like to discuss their definition of inferior." The negotiation that followed was unlike anything in recorded diplomatic history. 12 billion humans, 1 exiled alien, 3 Etherian ships, and a communication device built by a civilization that had vanished before any of the current species had learned to use fire. Sarah found herself serving as translator, mediator, and occasional comedian, as both sides worked through centuries of assumptions and misconceptions. The breakthrough came when Dr. Rodriguez suggested a practical demonstration. If Lyralay's approach to emotional exchange is truly beneficial to both parties, let's prove it. We have volunteers from psychiatric facilities across human space willing to participate in controlled trials. "And we have Etherian observers who could witness these trials," added Admiral Chen. "Transparency might be the key to trust." 3 hours later, Sarah watched the first official human-Etherian cooperation ceremony, conducted via quantum link while standing in ruins older than either species' recorded history. The Etherian pursuit ships had landed nearby, their crews now engaged in what appeared to be scientific discussion, with human researchers appearing as holograms above the ancient communication device. "So," Sarah said to Lyralay as they watched Etherian and human negotiators establish protocols for ethical emotional exchange, "how does it feel to accidentally become the galaxy's first interspecies therapist?" Lyralay's ears twitched with amusement. "I believe your species has a saying about unexpected career changes, something about when one door closes, another opens. Usually we apply that to getting laid off from boring jobs, not to revolutionizing interspecies relations, Sarah replied. Though I have to admit, this beats monitoring cargo manifests. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the newly constructed Etherian embassy on Kepler Station, watching Lyreley work with her first group of human volunteers. The process was remarkable. Individuals struggling with depression, anxiety, and trauma found genuine relief as Lyreley absorbed their negative emotions while sharing carefully calibrated positive energy in return. The applications extend far beyond therapy, Dr. Rodriguez was explaining to a group of visiting researchers. Stress management for high-pressure occupations, emotional support during grief and recovery, even performance enhancement for athletes and artists. Sarah nodded, making notes for her latest report. Commander Harrison